welcome back to the Well Dwellers podcast. I'm so thankful you're here today and that I get to share with you a presentation that I got to share with my home church, the First Alliance Church here in Treaty 7 Lands, Calgary, Alberta. If you don't know who I am, my name is Eric Freiberger. So I got to share with the staff at First Alliance just the other day a presentation I called The Road Less Traveled, and it was about seeking directions for belonging in a disabled church and world. To start us off, I would like to play a song for you in the hopes that it might frame and focus our minds for the conversation we're going to have about disability and about belonging. After I play the song, I will share a few questions with you to reflect on just in thought. You can pause the playing of our episode here to maybe even journal or jot a few thoughts down, but just allow yourself to entertain these questions in your mind. And then press play again, and we will dive in to some of the presentation and the thoughts that I had towards seeking directions to belonging in a disabled church and world.
Crooked path through time's uncontrolled, where shadows stretch and hands grow cold. The cane taps softly on a steady drum, each step a hymn where silence hums. Do you see the stars when you're walking slow? Or just the stones beneath your toes? The questions rise like mist at dawn. Faith and doubt, they both belong. The road less traveled, the scars we bear, God walks beside us, breathing air through broken bodies and poured out souls. We find our place where mercy calls. The pews are straight, the doors are wide, but who decides who rolls inside? The wheel that turns, the brace that bends, are holy shapes in God's own hands. If grace is blind, does it need eyes? Or does it see where justice lies? The road less traveled, the scars we bear, God walks beside us, breathing air through broken bodies and poured out souls. We find our place where mercy calls. The world's a map of lines and cracks, of narrow lanes and winding tracks, each voice a thread, a woven prayer, together whole, though frayed and rare. The road less traveled, the scars we bear, God walks beside us, breathing air through broken bodies and poured out souls. We find our place where mercy
What is the road less traveled that you may have took so long ago as a knowing or unknowingly disabled young man or woman seeking a promising life and Christ-honoring way? Who has helped you along in the journey as you met fellow travelers along this road? What are some of the spaces of belonging that you found along this way? What challenges have you overcome in the twists and turns of this journey? And now that you are here, wherever this may be, what road will you travel down next? So, I would like to share with you a bit about some of my journey with disability first. But in doing so, I need to make a disclaimer that I'm not so great at talking about myself. So while there's a lot to share of the journey I've taken over the last 3 decades, I'm going to try and just highlight some of the real story behind my disability and the experiences I've had with that. So I grew up here in the Calgary area, and in 1994, I was involved in a motor vehicle accident, resulting in a spinal cord injury with 2 locations in my spine. The C4, C5 vertebrae is the technical term, or the base of my neck, and the T4 level of my spine, which is about the middle of the chest or back. In the same time, I also began my independent life of living on my own, where I moved into a group home known as the fourth dimension. Yes, you heard that correct. I lived in the fourth dimension. I also met a wonderful woman there named Bonnie, who would eventually become my wife. And we got married in 1999. She too is also in a wheelchair. She is what's called a C1, C2 spinal cord injury, also known as the hangman's fracture. If you're not familiar with this kind of injury, Christopher Reeves had the same spinal cord injury himself. But like most spinal cord injuries, everyone presents their symptoms and paralysis in different ways from their injury. And Bonnie is quite miraculous in the sense that she was able to walk for several years with the aid of a walker for short distances, but she has certain motor capabilities that most C1 and C2 don't. And of course, over the years, we both have changed in our paralysis and our abilities as we age. We built a home in Calgary on the southeast side, and while there, I started my graduate studies at Alberta Bible College with a bachelor's in theology, and then a little while after that, a few years later, I also did a graduate study program online through Rochester College, now Rochester University. It was a kind of a cutting edge program at the time. And I'm so grateful for Dr. Mark Love and his graciousness to allow me to do this online with him, where I would go through, at the time it was through Zoom or through FaceTime with the classes that would be done in the intensive weeks down in the States. And then I would do work through email and through the web portal. So it was a rather radical movement at the time in 2012 when I began that whole journey, long before COVID made it to just the common experience. In 2007, a little before that, Bonnie and I started a house church here in our home after experiencing a great interaction in Vancouver at a conference for a week with Alan Roxborough and Alan Hirsch, who absolutely converted me, if you will, or not really converted, because I was already realizing I was speaking the same language, but in the missional theology idea. And this really became part of a calling for both of us while we started our house church. And later, in about 2012, and same time as my graduate studies, I joined a network called the Edge House Churches, and I would become part of one of their main leadership team that looked after about 14 house churches here in Alberta, and a lot of great memories and adventures with them at that time. Jumping ahead a little bit as we talk about disability, in 2021, I got an injury to my left shoulder where I had to have reconstructive surgery right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, where I underwent surgery, but I also ended up with complications following that surgery and had a prolonged hospital stay of about a year and 3 months. When I was there, I began really wrestling again with this understanding of myself as disabled. I resisted it for many years not because I didn't recognize that I had a disability, but because I didn't want to be boxed in and simply framed around just that experience of disability. I am 47 years old, and the reality is that my life is far more complex, far more dynamic, and far more full of different experiences and passions and abilities than just the disability that I face. And I face these kind of resistance to the ableist frameworks of our world that seem to confine disabilities into the accessible zones for a long time. But I do think that I felt that something had changed within this moment. I knew I needed to become more familiar with my understanding of disability, and I felt compelled to advocate and speak with and for the disabled community, which launches into what I'm doing today. I started the blog and the podcast of At the Bottom of the Well and the Well Dwellers podcast. I shaped it around 3 questions that really I recognized being a continuing theme, as well as wrestling within my own life with disability. The first question being, who am I? What does it mean to be disabled? Of course, my understanding of disability is, I kind of hope to share here with you, is that it has matured and grown over the years. I didn't carry the same definition with me throughout the 3 decades that I've been in a wheelchair. Academically, I can articulate to you that there are several models of disability that you can find online and in most reading material about the subject, and it can be described in different ways. One website that I'll leave in the resources of this video and episode talks about 17 different models of disability. One that I might highlight for you specifically is known as the social model of disability. This is quite often the one that is not seen or understood by many in the able community of our society. The social model of disability says that disability is not just about the person, it's about the way society is set up. In this view, people aren't disabled because of their bodies or minds, but because places and attitudes make it hard for them to take part in everyday life. Instead of blaming the person, the social model says it's up to all of us to change things like buildings, policies, and attitudes, and culture too, so everyone can join in fully. According to this model, people have impairments like trouble seeing, moving, or understanding, but they're only disabled, within quotations, when society doesn't make room for their needs. That's why some prefer to say disabled people in quotations, meaning people who face barriers because of the way society is organized. To fix the problem, we need to change, big and small, in our communities, workplaces, and public spaces. Making sure everyone has equal access is a matter of basic human rights. This is a change that is not just to the physical accessibility, the buildings, and the environment, but also a change in mindset, culture, and relational understanding. Of course, like I said, lots of other definitions that we could explore and understand about definition in the academic sense, and they overlap too. But the other thing I want to share with you about this is my experience, which, as I recently shared on the podcast, a letter to you or a paper I wrote, I should say, in the early 2000s for my undergraduate studies at Alberta Bible College. I wrote a paper called Paul's Letter to the Disabled People of Today. And when I read through it, I realized, wow, back then, early 2000s, I had quite a rigid black and white framed in view or understanding of disability, mostly focused entirely on the physical disability I faced throughout my life, being in a wheelchair and having a stronger left side over a right side. I also thought at that time probably that nothing's going to change. It will stay the same as it is then as it will into my later senior years. I have grown from this understanding. I've recognized that disability doesn't just take the single form of physical reality, but rather it is intertwined and intermingled with the other parts of my identity and understanding. My physical challenges affect some of my cognitive abilities at times when I'm battling certain infections or emotions that seem to creep in and affect my ability to think and to psychologically deal. It also gets into my spiritual identity and understanding when I think about my relationship with God and my expressions of faith and the spiritual rituals that matter to me and how I express them. I kind of describe it as kind of like the organic onion, where there's this peeling back of the layers of the onion, and each of them grow organically in my life and mature differently as time goes by. Of course, age is also a factor in recognizing, in my injury in 2021, that rigid sense that my disability will not change is not true. I remember thinking that spinal cord injuries are static. They happen, they're done, and now you move on to what you have within that disability. But the reality is spinal cord injury is a progressive disability. It is not static. A second question that has often shaped my life and that I have wrestled with is the question of where can I find dignity and belonging? There's a whole bunch of sub-layers to this question of dignity and belonging. And of course, maybe at the top of this, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, is a question of what does it mean to be disabled and yet still created in the image of God? There's some fancy language around this theologians like to use called the imago Dei, and how we're all created in this imago Dei, the image of God. But what does it mean for God to see the disabled person, or actually vice versa? What does it mean for God to see disability in his own image? Now, there's a powerful thought. Kathy Black writes this phenomenal quote that I really love in her book, A Healing Homiletic. She says, if we truly believe all are made in the image of God, then we must learn to see God through disabled eyes, to hear God through autistic voices, and to feel God through bodies that move differently. Understanding the definition of disability has to be both relational, but also honoring and acknowledging to the uniqueness of the person and of the community that they're in, the society around them. There's, of course, other sub-questions in here about community. Where is the church in advocating for disability rights? Or even where is the church in discipling the people who are in their community on disability theology and why disability matters to God and to Jesus? How does the church create recognized spaces for disabled within the community that not only acknowledges presence, but empowers for inclusive forms of sharing the gospel through events, gatherings, discipleship, and leadership? And of course, one primary question that I think every disabled person on the face of the planet asks, as well as the community and society that's around them, the question of why. Why am I disabled? Is it something I did? Or is it something that my parents did? Am I being punished? These are questions that are natural and normal for everyone to really ask as they wrestle with disability. Third question that has often shaped and been at the heart of my journey with disability is, what hope do I have today and for the future? What does disability theology and spirituality teach us about the differences between a cure mentality and healing, weakness and gifting, soteriology and salvation? It's key questions that provide a sense of hope and a significance of purpose and calling for mission and vocation and placement in community. Why we get up in the morning. It's, we need to realize that hope is not instilled in some unearthly eternal kingdom that is in our future, that we're simply in detention waiting to arrive at. And is there any way we could hurry it up? That's a very dangerous question to ask when we think of hope. But rather, it's recognizing that hope is something that journeys with us even in the darkest moments, but is there beside us to, as the song shared earlier, breathe the air along with us, to provide strength in the times of our greatest weakness. So when we hear these questions, I also recognize that I'm not the only one who asks these questions. Jesus's followers also asked these questions too. John 9, in the beginning of this chapter, tells the story of when Jesus and his disciples were traveling along in the streets. There was this man on the side begging for supports from the passersby, and he was blind. And the disciples ask Jesus, "Rabbi, teacher, why is this man born blind? Is it because of his sin, or is it because of his parents sinned?" And Jesus reveals something really kind of radical here and rather transcends their question. He changes it so that it's not about the negative form of what they see before them, but rather he converts it to a positive understanding of the greatness behind his character and his blindness, the strength, if you will. He says, this man is born blind so that we might see the glory of God in him. The real miracle here is Jesus attributes the glory of God, the work, the presence, the love the embrace of our Creator in this man's character, life, and incarnation in fleshing, long before he even touches him, long before any sense of cure or healing takes place. God's glory is seen throughout this blind man's entire life. He presents a narrative, a story that says glory is seen and God is witnessed throughout even the harshest and hardest moments when you can't see him. And it is through that experience that Jesus answers some of these questions, not through the touching of his eyes and bringing sight. That is part of it, absolutely. The touching of his eyes, the witness of healing, this too can be a moment, but it's not the end all be all of this experience. God's glory is in the life of this blind man throughout his entire life, before and after healing. And of course, these questions are also still being asked today. I'm going to share with you a bit about what I'm calling the invisible world, or perhaps more accurately, it's the unseen world. And you can absolutely explore the philosophies of why is the disabled world the unseen world? I'm sure we could ask a lot of questions around this. But to start off, here in Alberta, 1.7 million people in Alberta are considered disabled. That is nearly 30%, specifically 27%, but that's only in recorded statistics, of course. But Statistics Canada says that 1 in 4 Albertans are disabled. Compare that to the rest of Canada, and you have 8 million people considered disabled across our country. Seniors are considered the majority, around 40% plus or minus, and other age brackets and age groups below that in the youth, middle age, young adults, they average around the 20% mark themselves, plus or minus. So I think it's important to point out that you can't just default to disability as equated mostly to ageism or the senior category. Rather, if you have 1.7 million people in Alberta considered disabled, at least 1 million, if not a little more, are of younger age brackets, whether it be youth, young adult, or middle-aged. 10.1% of all disabled Albertans are considered to be below the poverty line. This means they depend on social services like AISE, which is the Assured Income for Severely Handicapped. You probably heard a lot about that in the news and some of the social justice issues that are faced by this community. As they're being forced into a new program called the ADAP, and all the implications that happen from that on their lives. This is a huge stressor point for this community that they're dealing with. I won't talk about that here today. Perhaps on another episode, we might dive into that with a guest or two. There's also Alberta Aids to Daily Living, AADL program that helps with this, as well as with the greater disabled community. There is the CPPD, the Canada Pension Plan for the Disabled, as well as recently the Canadian Disability Benefit, the CDB, which also has been in the news as AISE clients and people who rely on AISE are having those federal supports removed for them and taken away. And there are other community agencies that are there to support and help the disabled community. And we can share those in later episodes too. I think one of the things I came across recently that was rather shocking about this unseen world of disability came from the Calgary Foundation for the Quality of Life. They recently did a survey here in 2025, and I'll post a link to the results of that survey as it shares in a lot more detail other implications. But 69% of Calgarians, the average Calgarian, are concerned about domestic violence. And as high as that number is, I think it's even more concerning and revealing that 92% of Calgarians with disabilities are concerned about domestic violence. You have to pause at that number. 92% of Calgarians with disabilities are concerned with domestic violence. How can this be, and why? What causes this? This is something we need to ask, and we need to seriously pray over and find disturbing. In a book by Father Matthew Schneider called God Loves the Autistic Mind, he shares that twice as many disabled Christians do not attend church. A friend of mine who's been on the podcast before, Ty Reagan, he has kind of done some rough math with the statistics to figure out a percentage on this. And according to his calculations, this is about 84% of disabled Christians do not attend church. For those of us who are in church leadership, this has to be a concerning factor when we think of how is the disabled community hearing the gospel or experiencing the gospel in their life. How is it shaping and affecting their spiritual well-being and their whole well-being? So let's ask two questions as we think about these invisible and unseen world as a church community. Do you see the same statistics of disability in your church? Why do you think this is, or perhaps why not? I'd like to take a few minutes now to dive into the questions of belonging for the disabled as they try to find spaces of belonging and of relationship to the church. I don't know if you're familiar with a book. I will also leave the resource in the website and the show notes for this episode. But Joseph Myers wrote a book quite a long time ago, several years ago, called The Search to Belong, Rethinking Intimacy, Community, and Small Groups. I really enjoyed a lot of the thoughts he had in there, but particularly, I really grasped hold of his circles of belonging. He talks about the space of intimate belonging, of personal belonging, social belonging, and public belonging. There's a lot to unpack and a lot to explore in these spaces. Of course, they have grown over the years in understanding and found a lot more resources in writing and other authors who have talked about them. But I found some examples of what kind of numbers are reflected in these spaces where you have, as I show in the circles of belonging picture on the slide, the smaller numbers being at the intimate level, stretching out into the greater numbers in public life. The numbers I share are not that important. In fact, I think Joseph Myers articulates them in much higher brackets. But all I want you to see is kind of the image of that, where the intimate group is quite a bit, that really close-knit community that sees your vulnerable state extended out into the public sphere, where you have less of that sense of connection, maybe, or intimacy. If there's nothing else you take out of this image of circles of belonging, there's two things I really want you to hopefully hold on to. First, although we have similarities and common intersections within these spaces of belonging, each of us experience them uniquely and differently. I'll give you an example, the intimate space. In the context of intimate space, most individuals have significant control over their homes and closest relationships. This autonomy allows people to manage their private environment and maintain boundaries that foster a sense of security and trust. However, for many disabled individuals, such control is often diminished due to the necessary involvement of caregivers and healthcare workers. My wife Bonnie and I experience this on a daily basis. The presence of these external supports, while essential for daily living, can impose on personal autonomy and privacy. As a result, disabled individuals may experience heightened vulnerability within their most private spaces. You have to wonder if that truth, that reality, is actually showing why there is that deep concern in that reflected statistic of 92% of the Calgarians who are disabled finding concern in domestic violence. Okay, and the second thing I really want you to take away from these circles of belonging, I think maybe even more important than the first, is that all of these spaces of belonging coexist with one another in one cosmic relationship and agency. They intermingle, intertwine, and transform one another in a kind of organic, eco-relational system. You notice in the drawing that I share that the lines of these circles are dotted. They're permeable. They're not rigid and solid. And I think that's kind of one of the misconceptions or misunderstandings that we often have of these spaces, particularly in our leadership style and our leadership practices, is we think that when we are leading and creating space with belonging in each of these spheres, that they're autonomous, they're self-governed, and we can hold on to the expression of control or the space of definition and decision making solely within that space. And it doesn't necessarily affect the other spaces of belonging, so that the corporation of the church, the institution of the church, can make decisions while deferring decisions and actions and activities of the other spaces, be it social, personal, or even in the church member's home, to their own individual agency or acts of decision making. But the reality is that's not true. We have a corporate responsibility to move into all of those spaces and recognize that the way we act and the decisions we make affect all of those. Giving you an example from the public space, what we embody and incarnate as a church entity within the public space has a rippling effect into the other spaces of belonging, including the intimate spaces of people's homes and life autonomy. Our actions and presence in the public sphere do not exist in isolation. Instead, they extend into and impact personal and intimate domains. The values, behaviors, and relationships we foster publicly as a church community shape how individuals experience connection, trust, and autonomy in their private lives. This interconnectedness means that the public identity and collective practices of the church can either support or challenge the boundaries and well-being within the more personal and intimate spaces of its members. I like to call this the cocoon effect. People have asked me, why do churches need local embodiments of disabled ministry? Quite simply, because we need to honor, respect, and identify and articulate our relationship to the uniqueness and the expression of disability in our local communities, and the people that are a part of that group, the people that embody that uniqueness, so that we can empower it, we can equip it, we can help develop it and mature it. Why do I use the image of a cocoon? Because I see it as kind of like an ecosystem. A caterpillar crawls into a cocoon so that it can mature and grow and become a beautiful butterfly. And it develops this cocoon around it, not really so much as a protection, but rather as a identification of being metamorphosized or transformed within it. And the ecosystem around it, the tree, the other elements of the tree's life, are there to help serve, protect, and care for this unique cocoon until that butterfly within it, or the caterpillar within it, can emerge and reveal its beauty, its amazing strength, its character of uniqueness, and the way it brings new life and new stories and new expressions to the greater ecosystem of that tree, of that community. Okay, and the other thing I wanted to share with you here about belonging comes from the zones of learning. And I recently came across this in a learning center time with the New Leaf Network, where with an online group, we explored a program called Neighbors Up, Relational Spiritual Formation for Canadian Churches. I will again leave a link in the resources of the show notes of this episode. But I'm going to cover it really briefly because I know we are going on here with time. But we teach this in our communities and in our churches, and it was taught online with the idea of starting with the individual in the comfort zone, who we want to encourage and disciple into the fear zone, and confronting a lot of the challenges of that fear zone with the problems that are articulated, with the affected by other opinions that people often deal with, or the excuses they come up with, or the lack of self-confidence that they have. And then we move them into the learning zone where they acquire new skills and begin to extend some of that comfort into some of the learning that they're doing. And finally, into the growth zone where people find new purpose and live the dreams that they have, and they set new goals or achieve the goals they have and realize those aspirations. Okay, so here's what I want to take away that I started playing with when I saw these zones of learning. What happens if we overlap those zones of learning over top of the circles of belonging? And I couldn't help but notice how that sense of the growth zone becomes part of that public expression. And how many times do we as a church feel like we are the embodiment of that growth zone? When in reality, it's not just about equipping and getting individuals to come into that space, but rather we are called in the growth zone to move back through those areas of learning so that we revisit what we have learned. We reevaluate those learnings. We mature them, or we realize that some of them are harmful and we deconstruct them so that we can relearn things that are healthier and better practices. We go through those fear zones that the corporate mindset has, the red tapes, the roofs on houses that we're afraid to rip off because of certain restrictions. And we ask ourselves, what are the social justice issues that need to be tackled and spoken against as a corporate identity of church? And we enter that intimate space of the comfort zones and find a new revived comfort of realizing the depth and importance of Jesus finding intimate relationships with his followers corporately. Overlapping the spaces of belonging with the learning zones creates a dynamic environment where growth and inclusion are at the forefront. It is not enough to leave the active movement of discipleship solely to individual responsibility. As a church, we must collectively revisit each circle, reflecting on what we are learning, addressing the fears and bureaucratic obstacles that hinder entrance into all spaces of belonging, and intentionally deepening our connections with disabled and marginalized communities. This corporate approach calls for a revelation, a reevaluation of our practices, encouraging us to confront the barriers that prevent full participation. By moving through these circles together, we foster a culture of continual learning and mutual growth. Our journey toward more intimate and authentic relationships with those who have been marginalized is strengthened when the church acts as a unified body, committed to breaking down barriers and cultivating spaces where everyone feels they truly belong. I think we're at that point now where we're asking that question of where to from here. And as I contemplated this question a few weeks ago, I came across the passage again of Matthew 14, verse 13 to 21. This is a story often given the name of the feeding of the 5,000, or for many of us, we're familiar with the story of the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish that a young man brought to Jesus, and Jesus had his disciples rip up and share a miraculous meal with these 5,000 people that had gathered there that day. But what I really want to highlight in this story is the response before all this happened that Jesus' disciples and followers had given to Jesus after the experience of the earlier day. Jesus had spent the day healing, probably teaching, and relationally connecting to this large crowd of 5,000 people that were around him. And I picture kind of the statistics of today being reflected in that number so long ago of the 5,000. Let's be realists here. There were disabled people that were alive and there in Jesus's time. It says he was healing people during the course of his activities that day. So if 1 in 4 Albertans are considered disabled, what if that 1 in 4 number was part of this group of 5,000? That means that, a little less than 1,000 people, maybe even 1,000 people in this gathering around Jesus and his followers were considered disabled. And I think realistically, it would be not a proper understanding to say that Jesus spent the entire day healing all of them. This is not really what a gospel, true, mature understanding is. Jesus had far more involvement with disabled people than just healing them. So there was more happening in the course of this experience. And the people are growing tired and weary, and Jesus' disciples turn to him and say, "Lord, send these people home so that they can find their own ways of finding food, of fulfilling the social needs that they're facing, where they might need healing or supports for the challenges they are facing in their health, in their well-being, or the questions that they have about their faith and their spirituality." And Jesus says, no, we need to find a new way, a way to corporately deal with the challenges of the crowd, of the community, as a organized group of people. Jesus' example points to a different way, one that recognizes the power and potential of the collective. In the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus gathers a community, shares compassion, and addresses needs together. Likewise, the church is called to move as a unified body, actively embracing and addressing both the challenges and the unique contributions of disabled members. This means fostering spaces where everyone belongs and ensuring that disability is not seen as a marginal issue or minority issue, but as a central part of the communal life and identity. It is tempting and easy for us to simply step aside as a communal entity or agency while putting the relational responsibility to and for disability solely on the spaces and shoulders of individual people. This approach can lead to isolation, placing an undue burden on those affected while allowing the wider community to disengage. When disability is relegated to individual spaces, the church misses out on the deeper transformative work of belonging and solidarity. By accepting this corporate responsibility, we create opportunities for deeper relationships, growth, and transformation. We confront barriers together, reevaluate our practices, and seek greater inclusion in all areas of church life. This collective approach honors the gift of disabled individuals and recognizes that real belonging happens when the whole community participates, moving beyond accommodation toward genuine partnership and shared leadership. My greatest hope coming and sharing this message with you today in today's episode is that we as a community here at the bottom of the well and in the Well Dwellers podcast can see disability not as something to accommodate to, but as a perspective that we need. As I reflect and think about some of the innovation needed and imaginative solutions, some of the questions that I ponder with, and I share with you in the hopes that together we might explore them sometime or even come up with some real profound answers that we can truly work at. How can we empower, equip, and raise up disabled leaders theologically in the visible church and in our community roles? Where and how might we create these cocoons of disabled ministry within local churches and local online communities? How can we create these cocoon groupings of disabled learning and growing of what it means to be a follower of Jesus with disability? How might we develop budgets and NGO umbrellas for these ministries to flourish? Where and how can we continue the conversation while spreading this vision of inclusion with the greater church leadership in Calgary and beyond? That last question, I want to take a moment to share with you some exciting news and invite you, if you are still listening and still ingrained in this topic and conversation, some of you might be asking, well, what are some practical ways we can do this as a community, as a church? Some of you might be leaders that are wondering how you might bring this message to more of a reality in your community. I want to invite you to the upcoming Deeper Communion National Conference that's going to be happening next May 6th and 7th, 2026, where the Well and Deeper Communion are presenting a phenomenal time together over those 2 days, where we're hoping together as disabled and abled church leaders and community members, we'll explore how creative hospitality and biblical imagination open the door to inclusive communities modeled by Jesus. Expect warmth, story, laughter, tears, and inspiration as we gather to dream about God's banquet table where everyone belongs. The Wednesday evening is going to be a time where we share over a dinner banquet. I think we're planning on lasagna and maybe an alternative. Afterwards, we are going to get to enjoy a talk between my friend Ron Bushman and my wife and myself. We are the guest speakers talking about marriage and relationships in the life of disability. The Thursday after is going to be more of a kind of a deep water type talk. We're going to be talking some heavy stuff with national speakers streamed in from across the country. In Toronto, we have Terry and Jenna Sanderson sharing as keynote speakers. Here in Calgary is John Coots is going to be our guest speaker, along with someone from Vancouver. We do not have a keynote speaker yet ready, but they will be coming along. And then in the afternoon of Thursday, locally here in Calgary, we have some TED Talks with Ty Reagan sharing about community and belonging. And then followed by John Van Sloten talking about his relationship with his son, Edward, and his new book, The Parable of Life with Edward. So if you'd like to keep this conversation going, please sign up and register. When the registration comes up, stay tuned. We will have more news coming about the Deeper Communion National Conference. And tell others about it. Invite them to come along. This is not just for those in disability ministry. This is for all leadership in the church and in community. Lastly is Q&A. I realize we can't do that live, so drop a comment. If you have any questions, email me at my contact information, which will be shown at the end of the video. It is ericfreiberger@substack.com. I'd be happy to entertain any questions and thoughts you have. And then I hope to see you at the national conference. That is my presentation that I shared with my home church, and that I hope you were inspired and took a lot out of that message. Just a word about an upcoming event a little over a week away happening here with The Well. That song I shared with you earlier was actually written on a AI program by myself called Tuno. And I wrote it with the help of this program. It brought some music to it and a vocal. We are learning to do this as disabled people. Some of us have verbal problems and challenges. We have vocal disabilities that can prevent us from sharing. But deep down, there is a voice that needs to come out. There are other ways that disabled can find new expressions to the things they live in their disabled life through music. So I want to invite you on November 29th to sign up for the Remixing Reality event. There's really only about 6 spaces left. So please email me if you are interested in attending this at the Calgary Central Library that afternoon between 2 and 4 p.m. We'll have some food and drink. We're going to have Bruce Callow sharing about how to do this and having a whole lot of fun. Anyways, I want to thank you for listening to me today. Please do like this video and share it with your community and with those you know who would like to be a part of the conversation and would get a lot out of this. It's been really an honor to share with you today. Thank you for tuning in to the Well Dwellers podcast. Again, my name's Eric Freiberger, and I will catch you next time in the next episode of the Well Dwellers podcast.
We find our place where mercy calls. The world's a map of lines and cracks, of narrow lanes and winding tracks. Each voice a thread, a woven prayer, together whole, though frayed and rare. The road less traveled, the scars we bear, God walks beside us, breathing air through broken bodies and poured out souls. We find our place where mercy